Well, guys, welcome to Grains, Guts, and Glyphosate. I'm John.
I'm Chris.
And we've been in the agriculture industry a long time. And basically, we're going to be guiding you through a wonderful exploratory adventure as we go through gluten, why people can't digest, or they don't think they can digest gluten anymore, and what's going on in the grain industry. And then we're going to basically be going through the most common grains, how to keep them, store them, how to find grains that are actually clean, how to mill them, how to prepare them. But this is a very serious talk because basically you have a lot of people that can't digest grains, and they're basically baiting and switching everyone. They're telling them it's because of the gluten. Does anyone have a gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity? Does anyone have family members with gluten sensitivity or friends with gluten sensitivity? Yeah. So this is a common problem, right? Where people think they have a gluten sensitivity. But the reality is that when people buy grain products in the store, the majority of the product that they're having trouble digesting is not the gluten, it's everything else. Because before the grain gets to the baker, it's going to be hit with chemicals 7 times on average. 7 times. Chemicals that are illegal in Europe. Some of these chemicals are illegal in even Asia and China. And then includes the milling process, right? And then, in addition to that, when you finally get it to the baker, we did a great video going through all the different things they add to bread. The baker is going to add anywhere from 22 to 35 extra ingredients, including like dough conditioners and datum. And what were some of the other exciting ones that they had?
Datum was the one that all these enzymes, all these things that are meant to make it better in a sense, but better for whom? Is it better for the person eating it or better for the industry that's supplying it? It's more shelf stable for them. That's better for them. For us, well, you're all here. Something brought you here. Whatever brought you here, I want you to keep that in your mind for a minute. And I want you to think about what would the world look like if the only foods that we ate were ultra-processed foods. Just imagine what you think that would look like. And to me, it would look a lot like the world we live in, because that's pretty close to the world we live in. You might have thought doom and gloom, like, the sky is falling is that world, right? Or that's the world of science fiction, of Soylent Green, if you know what that is. Eating just a pill a day and that keeps you sustained, made in a lab. But in reality, that's the world we live in. Many people eat only ultra-processed foods. And many children, unfortunately. That's what's given to them. They don't have a choice, sadly.
But don't worry, they're going to sell you pharmaceuticals that will heal the symptom. And there are no side effects.
We are here in front of you, but really there's 112 or more farmers that we work with that are in an industry that kind of fights against being healthy for the public to eat. And that's a very kind of scary thing, but it's the world we live in today already.
So getting to, going through everything that we just said, I just want to wrap your head around this. When you get a grain product, right, like you eat a sandwich bread, right? You buy sandwich bread in the store. You've got 7 chemicals that are unlisted, and many of them illegal in other countries. And then you have 35 ingredients that were added in to make it efficient. Now you've got 42 ingredients, and you say, oh my God, all these 43 ingredients I'm eating plus the grain, it must be the gluten, And so we would think that, but the problem is we have people that come to our storehouse and buy from our farmers, and they go to Europe and they buy bread over there, and they say, oh, I'm not getting sick. Why am I not getting sick? And the bottom line is a lot of this has to do with not respecting God's design. When you abuse God's design, when you abuse the genetics, when you try to control nature instead of working and partnering with nature, it leads to sickness and death. And a lot of our friends died of cancer. We lost a lot of friends of tumors. in our years working in agriculture. And so, and a lot of our employees have lost loved ones. And the bottom line is, it doesn't have to be that way. We can move away from it, but all you need is knowledge. There's a Bible quote where it says, "My people perish due to lack of knowledge." And so that's why you're here. We're gathering knowledge so we can not only be healthier, but eat better tasting food and have more energy and live more years of our life, right? Starting out in agriculture.
Yeah, you have to remember that, and if you've been to some of the other talks, I hope you have, many of them have touched on what's going on in agriculture, what's going on in the small farm, the large farm, our household, just at home, our lawns, and everywhere that chemicals are sprayed. These chemicals are cytotoxic, which means they destroy your cells, genotoxic, they destroy your genes, and neurotoxic, they have an effect on your brain. And if you do your own research, and I implore you to do so, but remember, you're going to see a lot of, well, there's two sides to this. The studies go this way, the studies go that way. Just remember that this is something that you're eating or you're feeding your children. Studies going this way and that way, to me, it's not good enough. We should be looking at God's design. We should be looking at thousands of years of human culture and diet. And if everybody ate only the things invented in the last 50 years, and that's close to where we are, we'd be in a lot of trouble because of those effects.
Yeah, you'd have something like cancer spreading everywhere, something like that.
Something like that, right.
So, and by the way, I'm the youngest of 8 boys. I'm used to being interrupted. So if you have a very pressing question, feel free to interrupt us, and we will answer all the questions again at the end. So we're just going to start really quick, just to walk you through the path of grain. A farmer buys a seed to grow grain to hopefully get a high yield. Something he doesn't buy in the open market is GMO grain. Has anyone ever seen non-GMO grain marketed to them? Non-GMO biscuits made with non-GMO flour. The non-GMO movement is very important, but the grain industry doesn't buy GMO crops, right? It's not a common thing that farmers get. It's more common in South America. He'll buy a crop and then he'll plant it, right? And he basically doesn't. What does a GMO do? It resists a pesticide or it produces pesticide, right? That's what a GMO is. Really, it's a way to make money, but it's there to resist a pesticide and produce a pesticide. Grain doesn't need to resist or produce a pesticide. Why? Because you harvest it dead, right? And so the grain is planted in the ground, so they'll buy a crop, and they'll usually alternate it with something like, they'll make a winter wheat, and they'll alternate it with corn or soy. Well, when they plant corn or soy in the ground, right, they'll often use desiccants at the harvesting time. Does anyone know what the most popular desiccant is? Glyphosate, right? And so they'll plant this glyphosate, right, or they'll spray the glyphosate, and it makes it more efficient in the harvest, right? But as Chris researched, Chris, what was your findings on glyphosate? They told the farmers, don't worry, the glyphosate will disappear in the soil within 3 days.
This is related to the organic standard. In the organic standard, there's a process for a farm to become certified organic. And the amount of time that they have to be free of glyphosate was established to be 3 years. Because in a laboratory, after 3 years, glyphosate disappears in the laboratory. But in the real world, glyphosate is found to persist for up to 20 years or more. The chemical glyphosate isn't that old, so it's pretty much the original is still there. And how does that happen? It happens because in the real world, there are heavy metals, there are other substances out there that will react with and prevent the glyphosate from breaking down and disappearing from detection.
So if you're in year 15 of alternating crops between winter wheat, which is the majority of wheat in the United States, and corn and soy, you're in year 15 of also alternating with a government-subsidized crop that you spray desiccant on. Now you have 14 years of desiccants in the soil. So do you see how the chemical buildup in the soil could possibly have an effect on our gut flora? And so there's been a lot of talks covering on the glyphosate, but you're basically destroying your microbiome. And so essentially you have the farmer, he plants a seed, right? He may alternate the crops, right? And then, at harvest time, he may have, a fungus that he has to spray a fungicide. So now you got a second chemical. He may spray the glyphosate to harvest the wheat, because what if you're raising hundreds of thousands of acres of wheat and that patch over there isn't ready in time, right? What are you going to do? You're going to rent the harvester again, or bring out your whole harvesting team? No, you're going to spray it. So it all dies, and it's all easy to harvest, and you can do it at the same time. Some of these farmers, by the way, I don't know if you know how much a combine is, but the new John Deere X Series combines, they run like $500,000 all the way up to like 2.5 million or something like that. Really awesome machines, John Deere. I'm not making a slight in any way. I love your products. But the bottom line is, not all these farmers can afford it, so they're renting combines, right, just for a day, and it's thousands of dollars an hour, right? And someone says, why would you do that? Well, you do that because it can harvest 30 acres in an hour, right? So, or is it 30 acres in a day? No, 30 acres in an hour. So basically, you have now you have the fungicide, you have the glyphosate, you have the residue in the soil. Then it gets harvested, and then it's going to go to a grain bin. The grain bin, then, you have a ton of wheat sitting around, right? Then what happens? What happens when bugs infest those grain bins, as they naturally would do? You got to spray again, so go ahead and add the pesticides coming in. Then after it goes there, then it's going to go to, where are we going? Oh, the mill. Yeah, so the mill is my favorite area. So we used to have 25,000 mills in the United States. Now we're down to like less than 100. Most of them are owned by the same people. And most of them are going to be highly processing that grain, right? With all sorts of ingredients that are. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Chris? You basically.
You go ahead. You got the.
You're looking at all these ingredients. You're expunging the nutrients, and then you're adding in all these chemicals to enrich the flour, right? And these are required by for enriching, right? They require. They approved it for.
So enriched flour basically is a flour that vitamins have been added to, and a number of other things they have to be mixed back in. And this was required by law, I think, since the mid-90s in enriched flour. And there are, I think it's folic acid is one of the most controversial ones. You should watch out for, taking too much of certain substances, just because they may mitigate a birth defect, which is what the motivation was there.
But ironically, they found in several studies, they found that the folic acid was actually causing birth defects.
Right. The unintended consequence on the other side may outweigh by far. I think, in the last 5 years, we should have learned this law of unintended consequences pretty well.
And then you have bleaching, you have bromulation. So this product that was wheat has already, it hasn't even made it to the baker yet. So you've already got 7 chemicals on it, right? And then the question is, when you get the organic certification, what is really organic, right? So, and that's why Alice Waters ended up suing the CCOF, because they were, you have a big ton of grain, a big grain bin of grain. You prove it for organic certification. Well, what if it's not organic? You just made a ton of money, right? And so she sued the CCOF to try to basically, get some justice on this issue. We used to work with her back in the day in the 2010s. I used to work with some of their farmers, and so it's a big problem. And before that baker gets it, then the baker is going to add all these ingredients to give it that shelf life. So the bottom line is.
Let me just add something there, because we work with bakers, and we have tried to source good ingredients for them. And I wanted to share. This is a direct quote. Leaving out the name of the product. Talk to me later. You are still able to label your product organic with our product. So it was not organic, but they are allowed under some guideline to label that product as organic. And what I care about is that it is good to eat, it is safe to eat, it's not going to lead to health problems down the line. That's what I care about. I don't care about what I can label it as, right? And I think everybody here, the label is to communicate something to you. If it doesn't communicate what you think it means, it's meaningless.
Yeah, in addition to that, you have exempt ingredients that can be added to the actual bread products or the baked products that you don't have to list. So there's a lot of compromises with our certification system. And so that's why we all got together to try to source clean products and work with amazing farmers. And we basically have equipment that basically can test the actual glyphosate and mycotoxin levels as grain comes in. Do we have any questions, comments, insults, concerns? No? Praises? So what we're going to do, so to solve this problem, how do you solve this problem? So you have a corrupt system that's peddling out really unhealthy products. You have family members that can't digest gluten. You're trying to get back into it. The majority, the good news is there's a lot of hope, right? So most people that come to our place, even the people that took the celiac test and they spent all this money getting certified, I'm celiac and here's my test study, they're coming back and they're buying literally, they're getting buckets of flour and they've incorporated grain back into their body, so into their regular diet. And it just makes life a lot more sweeter. And so there's basically two things you have to do to protect your families and to get back to enjoying bread products again. And the first is you need to buy organic and verified organic, right? So you want products that aren't going to be sprayed with a lot of chemicals. You want it from mills, and that includes getting it from mills that basically aren't going to add any extra chemicals during that process, as well as fake enzymes. You'll see enzyme added to even organic flour lines now. And it's a biotech enzyme. It was created in the cattle industry. It's being added to flour, and it's approved for organics. And so, and then the second way, so buying good ingredients, and the second way is knowing how to prepare those ingredients, okay? So if you're gonna respect God's design, you've got to first source from people that are gonna do it right, and then you've got to, on the other side, know what to do with it in your home. And so that's what we're gonna talk about. We're basically going to go through a line of organic grains that we have here, and we're going to mill them up. So when you buy organic grains, you're looking for certified organic. Bonus if they do a mycotoxin and glyphosate test post-certification. And then you're basically going to, most grains can store up to 25 years if you store it correctly at 13% humidity in a really dark, cool conditions. But the average person is only going to store it for 5 to 8 years, right? And so in normal conditions, right? And if it's really hot and humid, it could break down and fall apart in less than a year. So make sure you protect your grains. Any kind of air sealing is really good. So why don't we go down the list, right? So we'll start with the soft grains. Okay, so you have your grains. And there's two types of flours, right? There's stable flours and there's whole grain flours, right? The type of flour you buy in the store, the whole wheat flour, is not real whole wheat. This is fake whole wheat. It is refined flour with the germ oil removed, and then they add bran back in. Sometimes not even the same grain. All right, so that shelf-stable flour is not going to be a real whole wheat, right? So in order to get whole wheat with its real germ oil, you're going to have to mill it at home or find a local miller and have them mill it, right? Once you mill something raw with the actual germ oil, you should put it in the freezer or use it. Outside of the freezer, it has like a month lifespan, I've noticed. Einkorn is a little bit different. Einkorn is really like, I don't know what it is, but the microorganisms in the air just love it and sour it really fast. So it tends to go bad a lot faster than the others. Probably like I would say like a week to 2 weeks, depending on how hot it is. Okay, and then you have stable flours, right? So the stable flours are the ones everyone's used to. Those are the white ones in the store. They're going to appear white even if they haven't been bleached and bromulated. And so the stable flours can last anywhere from 8 to 12 months. The good news is the phytates and lectins, most of them are removed. But the bad news is you're still missing out on that germ oil. So most people, when they make bread, they'll mix the two, right? And a good ratio is going to be like, 60% stable flour, 40% whole grain flour. And you can do all whole grain, but you're going to have to sift out a little because, as you know, whole grain breads are very dense. Has anyone been to Germany and eaten German breads? Yeah? They're very dense, right? That's why the people are so hearty. And basically, the more whole grain you have in it, the more fiber is there. But you need to think of your whole wheat versus refined flour. These are like orange juice and oranges, right? So the stable flour is like orange juice. It's really convenient. It's easy to use. You can consume it quickly. but you have a sugar spike, and then you get hungry sooner, right? Whereas like eating the whole grain, that's like eating an orange, right? You have 5 oranges, you're full. You're full for hours. You don't have a sugar spike, and but it's a lot harder to get through, right? So a lot of people, especially professional bakers, like the really talented ones that have like artisan bread companies that get from our co-op, they'll basically do a blend of both. So we'll go down the list. We're going to go down different types of wheat, and the most common being soft white wheat. Chris, you want to mill up some soft white wheat here?
Right.
Here you go. And so basically when you mill flour, you can mill it you can get all sorts of different brands. We like to use mock mills for the little mini runs that are around our main bar. They're great for like quick runs. And then we have bigger mills. We have about 3 mills in our location. But these are good for like the quick runs at home. So if you hold that up to the camera. So Chris is going to be milling, I think, just above fine, right? And so this is soft white wheat. Soft white wheat is used for pastry flour. It's when people say soft or hard, they say hard wheat. They're usually referring to actually protein content, right? So soft white wheat is going to be lower protein. And because it's lower in protein, it's more fluffy, right? You can do a lot of pastries with this, right? But if you try to make a pastry just with this without sifting out that bran, it's going to be very dense. So your croissant is going to be a lot lower, right? Whereas if I took out the bran, all the bran, right, and the germ oil, it would fluff up like crazy, right? So that's soft white wheat. And it's typically grown in the Northeast and the Northwest. You don't really see it. And that's another thing. Grain, you cannot grow every type of grain in every region. It's just like wine. And grain is like children. Each child has their own different personality. And the job of a farmer is to find out what those personality traits are and put them in the environment, and same with the parent, put them in the environment where they can best succeed, kind of guide them to where they can best succeed. And so each grain has a genetic disposition to grow well in different regions. Next one, which one would you want to do? We could go down to hard red wheat, since it's a very popular one. Hard red is what you see in almost all stores. When you buy whole wheat flour, you're buying a hard red wheat. This is especially hard red winter wheat. You'll hear hard winter wheat and hard spring wheat. When somebody says they're talking about spring wheat, they're actually talking about a summer crop. And it's usually a higher quality crop with more protein. When they say winter wheat, that means they plant it in the fall and they're going to harvest in the spring. And then after they harvest, they're going to go ahead and run your other crops, right? And so you can mill this fine, coarse, cracked, or grit. If you do it more fine, right, it's going to be more fluffy, right? But a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll take like 6 pounds and they'll say, okay, mill me like 5 pounds fine, and then mill the last pound like really coarse grit. And they'll sprinkle it on top or put it inside, kind of like, your Dave's Famous bread kind of style bread.
How many in here have baked with 100% whole grain flour like what's coming out of this mill now?
How did it go?
Not very good?
Yeah. Any success stories?
Who thinks they're the best at it? Oh, yeah.
We want your recipes.
Was it too dense? Okay. There are a few solutions to that, and one of them is called an extraction flour, which means it's sifted afterward to remove bran. And that's something that you can do at home if you have a sifter. It has to have a fine mesh, like 600 micron. I don't know what that is in mesh, imperial measurement, but I think it's a 20 mesh, something like that. But if you are interested in something like that, come and see us after. We can do that at our home mill. These mills and the mills that you can get on your tabletop, they don't have sifters attached to them.
Oh, I think the Como does. They invented a new topper that you can get, which is pretty cool.
So you might look into sifting your flour to remove a little bit of that bran, but the germ remains intact in the flour. So the health benefit is mostly kept. You're mostly just getting rid of fiber that was excess anyway. You wouldn't. Oh, you feed it to your chickens.
Yeah.
If you don't have, I mean, there are things you can do with pure bran. But
Yeah, and
it's good for
they
animals.
tried to sell bran muffins. Sometimes I get people, they're like, oh, I want to make my childhood recipe of bran muffins. And I was like, I hate to break it to you. That's probably that's an unhealthy choice. Like, why not just get the whole thing with the germ and germ oil, right? Because that's the life-giving parts. Now, going down the line, we're going to go to durum wheat. This is one of my, yeah.
I just wanted to ask, I mean, I put in just a little bit of extra gluten. I don't know if that's happy or not, because someone's going to tribute. But by putting a little extra gluten, it keeps the bran from popping those gluten bubbles. And it rises, and mine's almost as soft as sandwich.
There you go. There's the technique. And how do you add that gluten? Is that
Just,
an ordinary shelf-stable flour, or you get pure gluten?
well, I get it from a company.
That's
I
okay.
assume it's
Yeah,
No, I'm
one
only
thing.
asking.
stable, yeah.
It's new to me.
One
But
thing
you
I'm
can
going to
blend.
say is don't add things like, if somebody tells you to add like soy lecithin into your bread, don't ever read that book again. Don't put chemicals in your bread. Don't home bake. This is like people that build a well. They say, I got clean water out of the well. Now let me put fluoride in it so it's extra clean. You know what I mean? Like the whole point of the well is having clean water, right? The next one we're going to go on to is durum. This is often called pasta durum. This is one of my favorite grains next to emmer. And the emmer is the ancient version of this, which will go down. But durum is going to be almost exclusively grown in North Dakota. It is a high protein, low glycemic index grain. And this is going to be used for pasta production. I put 25% into almost all my pasta recipes. If you're doing the like a ravioli or tortellini, you want to probably do just refined flour. But especially if you're doing spaghetti or pappardelle, right? It's better to have this in it because it just digests better and slower, and also it grabs sauce on the way down. And it's really loud. It's this. The only thing louder to mill outside of durum is going to be corn. So if you want to show them that. So that's a
Is this
durum.
focusing, everybody? Can you see this when I hold it up to the camera? It won't focus. All right, hide the table, and then.
Now the next one is we're going to do rye, and this is actually Dylan rye from South Dakota, and
We'll
it's
have
named
time
after.
later. You can all see it up close.
Named after a young man, a wonderful young man. And Dylan rye is going to be the rye flour. You'll see people do. Who does sourdough here? Where are my sourdough fans here? So the reason why sourdough is so popular, by the way, is sourdough is the proper way to prepare wheat, right? Because wheat doesn't want to be eaten. It has phytates and lectins, right? It resists. It doesn't. It wants mammals to if they consume them, it wants to pass through the gut of a bird or a mammal, come out the other side with fertilizer. So in order to get rid of that, right? If you put it through the sourdough process, autoanalysis specifically, right? It actually, that soaking process is going to make it a lot more digestible. Has anyone ever tried to make like brown rice really fast and then went to the bathroom immediately after? The brown rice it still has its protective layers, right? And so that's why you have to soak it for so long. I hope I'm not educating somebody and they've been going through their whole life eating brown rice like right out of the pot. Do you want to talk about rye?
Which one, rye?
Do you want to talk about it?
Got it. Well, I think you wanted to mention, you asked about sourdough, but you didn't explain the connection.
Yeah, so rye is typically used in sourdough production. And the reason it's used in sourdough production, especially in starter production, we put this in our starter flour, is because it has high levels of lysine, which yeast and bacteria love. And so you'll get much higher rises and better performance out of your starter if you use rye. Now, if you're a sourdough producer, right, like rye and like some malted flour and some hard winter wheat does a really good starter. Just to remind you, make sure your water is clean. You really want water that's free of chlorine and fluoride. I know this sounds obvious for some people, but this is really important because you're creating a living organism and you don't want to poison it and destroy that beautiful biodiversity in the starter, because you're going to mix it into your bread, right? Especially if you want good performance. But rye, remember, I usually have a lot of pregnant women coming up to get rye, right? Because it has high levels of iron and magnesium, right? Then we have things like millet, buckwheat. We do a lot of buckwheat in Tennessee. Rice we get from Alabama, Texas. Should we do oats? We could do. Did we bring oats?
I don't have oats with us.
Oh, okay.
Groats tomorrow if people want to see
Okay,
it.
that's fine. We can do like an heirloom corn. So this next one, why don't you get the Wapsi corn?
Here.
This is Wapsi corn. And at the end, I'm going to bring these paddles up. I'll put them on the floor here. And you can kind of feel the texture and smell them. We actually have a bar, which is an odd concept. But we have a bar at our place, and people come up and they taste like flights of like 6 different grains or more. And people say, why would I do that? Because each grain has a different aroma, right? Like the Dillon rye is pretty neutral, but like we get some ancient varietals of rye where it's like very earthy. And I have a farmer in Missouri, he does a rye that's super sweet, right? He also makes a hard red wheat in an adjacent field and it smells like mushrooms. So I always tease him about it. I was like, what's going on with you? You know? And so, but each grain will put out a different aroma. And so that's the fun of working with these different grains. You get all the nutritive benefits, but you also get these awesome, awesome flavors. And that is why, like if you open up refined flour and smell it, it doesn't have any aroma, but the whole grains do. The Wapsi corn is probably the strongest aroma grain that we bring in. And we deal with a lot of corn in Tennessee. There's a lot of corn farmers. So we've had a lot of crops come our way. And I got to tell you, the Wapsi corn, it's an heirloom open pollinated corn. If you're a farmer, think about growing this. We'll help you. We'll help you get sources for other people. There should be replacing GMO corn. It's also easy to identify if it's been contaminated with GMO crops. Through the air because it has, you know, this beautiful spectrum of colors. But it literally, no over-exaggeration, if you doubt me, come and smell it. It's basically, it tastes like caramel popcorn. That's what it tastes like. And if you make a polenta out of it or like a cornbread, you're in heaven. So the Southerners, we love it, you know. So we got that. We're going to sweet white Sonora. So white Sonora, this is a varietal that was grown predominantly in the Southwest. And this is the holy grain, as we call it. It was brought by the Italian and Spanish missionaries. And it originates from Europe. And this is going to be essentially like an ancient version of the... There, you can go ahead and mail that. An ancient version of the soft white wheat. And it's going to be a little bit sweeter, a little bit more nutrient dense. And this makes really good naan bread. It makes really good communion bread if you bake for your church. It also, I like it in pizza. And you can do it in sourdough, but start out like at about 20%, right? Because it does have a lower protein content. Then we're going to go to Corazon. Does anyone know what Corazon's name is? The registered trademark name for that group of farmers up in the Northwest? What is it? Corazon, does anyone know its other name, its copyright name? Kamut. So it's Kamut. So you'll see Kamut advertised to you a lot. Farmers love Kamut, and when you come up here, look at the Kamut versus einkorn. It's literally, einkorn is 1/8 of the size. It is a high-yielding grain, and the Corazon is essentially a neutral grain. It doesn't have much aroma. It's very mild, so you're going to be kind of disappointed, but it makes good pasta. It's really good with flavored breads. So it's inexpensive. Like you can get a lot of yield. Farmers love growing this. It's easy to certify, easy to grow, high yields, good returns, and this is why you'll see farmers choosing Corazon over einkorn because just the numbers make sense and it's easier to manage. Go. So yeah, really good in bagels, by the way. Now the next one is spelt, and spelt's my personal favorite. It's actually really economical. In Italy, we call this farro grande, right? So this is the farro grande. Everyone hear about farro grains? It gets really confusing what the heck they're talking about. The Italians, we basically you have farro piccolo, which is einkorn, farro medio, which is emmer, and farro grande. So, which is spelt, right? So you'll hear this referred to often. And there's different strands of the same grain varietal. And so people argue, oh, well, that's not the farro strand, and this is, or this isn't. But it's really hard to identify the difference. Now, spelt is overwhelmingly nutty. Whereas, like, if you get rye and you buy a crop from a farmer, one batch is sweet, one batch is earthy, one batch is neutral. You never know what you're going to get. Spelt is always nutty, and it's just, it will always add this beautiful aroma. It smells amazing when you bake it in the house. Also, it's a complete protein. It has all 9 amino acids, which is really cool. And I have growing boys, so I like to give them this. And yeah, it's full of manganese and B6. Actually, this is the second highest levels of manganese and B6 of the grains. I think next to barley would be the only one that beats it out. So it's good for blood circulation. And since it's a faro grande, which means large, it's easy. You get a fairly big yield for this, right? So we have spelt, and then we have einkorn, right? Einkorn is always like a big favorite among everyone. Einkorn is the smallest wheat berry. This is the original wheat, and a lot of grains stem from this. It's one of the easiest to digest, but it's one of the most difficult to source. You can't pull it from up north in Canada because they won't let it cross the border in a lot of places. You can't get it from Europe because the USDA requires all incoming whole grains to be radiated, so you lose fertility, so farmers won't order it from Europe. And in addition to that, the einkorn, the few farmers that are growing it, they're trying to save as much as they can to carry it on to the next year because the market's growing. But it's super easy to digest. The gluten, do you want to mail this? The gluten level is it's a little bit weaker, right? Usually people that struggle with gluten intolerance, we say start with the einkorn and start with the malt flour, maybe, and blend them together. But you notice how quiet it is compared to the other grains? It has a very thin, and it finishes really quick. It has a very thin bran wall, and when you feel it, it's almost fluffy. And this is definitely the best flour for making chocolate chip cookies, even whole grain versions. Because out of all the grains, einkorn is the sweetest. It just is. It's the sweetest of the grains. And if you really get a good crop, because each crop is different, sometimes you get these beautiful honey notes. Okay, emmer. Emmer is my favorite. Does anyone know how to make risotto? This is like the ultimate risotto grain. So this is one that you can soak for 24 hours and go ahead and put it in with the broth and onions and garlic. It makes the best risotto. Hey, Luca! He's running towards me. That's my kid. And so the emmer, the emmer is basically, this is faro medio. And this is grown, actually, this batch is from North Dakota. And this will literally consistently, this is another one that's really consistent in flavor and aroma. It smells and tastes like graham crackers. And it will add this beautiful, almost like red tinge to your bread as well. And I saw an awesome, amazing baker do like a whole video presentation. Because I was curious to see, and she did them all the different grains side by side. And she said that the emmer was one of the best tasting. And that's in our bakery. We have an in-house bakery that has historically been the most popular. We make a Tartaria blend that's really cool, and it has emmer and einkorn mixed into it. And so these are just the crops we have now, but we have other crops that come in different seasons. So we have grain coming and going. We're supposed to move about 60 to 120,000 pounds of grain every month, which sounds like a lot, but for farming industry, this is quite small. So we have a lot of partners Scotch Fife.
Don't forget about the Scotch.
Yeah, and so he's Scottish, of Scottish descent, so he likes this. But this is of the Fife family, and this is traditionally used for whiskey production in Ireland. How is it different? You'll see a couple different varietals. So let's go over these discussions about ancient versus heritage, diverse hybrid. Most grains, right, when farmers think about grain, right, they're not, when we say, all the grain's been hybridized, the reality is farmers will say, well, hold on, wait, I can replant that grain and I get the same thing. I don't know if it's a hybrid, right? Because when you produce grain, right, there's really, I think it's 4 categories, right? Ancient, which is the original grain varietals, which are the most nutrient dense. Then you have pre-green revolution, which are the grains that are lower yielding, but they haven't been line bred to be high production. And then you have post-green revolution, right? And so those are the high-performing ones, right? Which tend to be a little bit harder to digest. But if you're doing sourdough, it doesn't really matter as much, right? Because you're basically fermenting it out. And so by basically a big reason why we started doing this is the co-op was formed because a lot of farmers were disappearing. If you look at the USDA stats, I think we lost 40% of our farmers in the past 50 years in grain production. It's all been consolidated into a few big movers and shakers, and all the grain elevators are owned by a few select companies which will remain nameless, but I think you know their names. And so we wanted a way, a lot of the farmers would come to us and they say, oh, they're offering me this price, and if I sell my grain at this price, I'll be broke in 6 months, right? And that's exactly what's happening. They're making them bid against the wholesale markets. And so really what we have to do is try to source from as many farmers as possible and start sharing equipment. And so that's like one of our big moves. So if you live in another area, I'd encourage you to do this or work with other farmers, to share the equipment and buy multiple combines so that you can essentially not have to bear that heavy load, right? Because to buy a $500,000 piece of equipment and then, back in the day, you used to buy a combine and that would pay for the farm. Now it's the other way around. Now the farm has to pay for that combine. And so, but by working together, you can have abundance, right? So it's just a matter of, and I tell this to the farmers all the time, those grain elevators got them to compete against each other. And then what they did was said, ooh, we're going to give you subsidies. And they said, oh boy, subsidies. So they got the subsidies, but everyone else is getting the subsidies. So what does that do? It lowers the price at the grain elevator. So that subsidy didn't really help you, did it? It helped the people that were buying your products and then destroying it and hurting the public. And then over time, you basically have this huge disconnect, right? And so in order to fix the problem, right, we have to source from organic farmers and build them up and give them fair pay, and then skip the major distribution channels. And then we want to essentially share the equipment and collaborate rather than compete. And that was the problem that we deal with a lot of farmers. The ones that are trying to compete and are nervous and worried and talking bad about their neighbor, those ones would always, it just get worse and worse for them. But over the years, I've seen something where the farmers are collaborating, where they believe that there's enough to go around, where they share information and work together. We've seen those farmers take off and grow and scale. And I think it's a really beautiful thing. Because if you build crops, if we raise crops in God's design, we can have abundance. If we do not do this, the end result is going to be very bleak. And as an organization, like all of our farmers, when we get together, we are really, people say, well, what are you organic? And I said, I'll tell you what we are. We stand against any genetic or chemical contamination of crops, animals, and people, okay? If we change the genetics and just go wild and say, oh, I can do better than God can do it, and you just start messing, look at the results, look at the fruits, They always say, judge a tree by its fruits. And so we need to get away from that. We need to stop genetically modifying, all these crops, stop injecting our animals with things that alter their DNA permanently. And if we can do that and we can repent from that and work together and collaborate, there is plenty of abundance. A lot of these farmers are good people. They just get trapped in lies and bad programs that in the end, it leads to, them losing the farm, essentially. I encourage you to, always buy organic. Stop going to the store and buying bread. Learn how to ferment your own bread. Your families that are struggling with gluten intolerance, teach them these things. Share these things. We have tons of videos that we can help them with. We're happy to answer any questions.